I was 18 years old and living in Senegal, Africa. Some native friends, knowing of my occasional marijuana and LSD use at the time, urged me to try an amazing plant that grew in the cemetery. However, some people warned me that the plant, which they called kubajara, was extremely dangerous. I pretty much dismissed these warnings, figuring that they had never done acid. This was a mistake. One night, an acquaintance dropped by my apartment, my parents' apartment, which was on the 18th floor. He had a pod and leaves from the plant. I figured we should just make a tea out of both, so we did. I drank about a cup, mixed with instant coffee. This was probably about 8 p.m. He left, not having drunk any. I can't remember the period of time after I ingested the drug, but the next thing I remember is answering the door and seeing two very grotesque monsters come into the apartment. In reality, it was my sister and her boyfriend. I had no idea I was hallucinating, unlike acid, where I'm aware of reality. I was completely unaware of reality for the next 24 hours. I was awake all night, seeing armies of insects on the kitchen floor, playing poker with people who were not there, and having long conversations with dwarves under my bedclothes. This was not in the least funny. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I only recall bits and pieces of the night, but the parts that I do recall are very terrifying. I remember looking in the bathroom mirror and seeing that my pupils filled my entire iris with no color left over at all. I had a conversation with the person in the mirror, not realizing it was me. I could not urinate, even though I desperately had to. My mouth was drier than Death Valley. I remember awaking my mother at dawn by standing at her bedside and asking if we were going to the Montreal Olympics that year. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was continually drawn to the balcony, and when I looked over at the streets, I kept seeing horrible car crashes. I could clearly see the cars crashing and hear the noise they made, plus the screams of the injured. Then planes started to crash. I saw people flying outside the balcony. Friends came and went during the day, and they were all extremely alarmed at my behavior. Someone had to watch me carefully. It was only towards the next evening that I began to realize that I had done a drug and that nothing I had seen had been real. I believe I was a hair's breadth away from seizures and possibly death. I do not recommend any experience with this drug whatsoever. I remember before I moved away last summer, there was talk of a plant called Datura. People were saying I could trip on it, so me already having done shrooms and acid thought, okay, let's give it a try. Datura is a plant that grew in my neighborhood with trumpet-shaped flowers on it, but before these trumpet-shaped flowers grow, there are seed pods, big, round, and spiky, extended from vines in front of an old lady's house. My friend Brian and I were total stoners looking to get fucked up, but we had no idea what we were in for. Word on the streets was that if I broke open these pods and consumed the seeds, I would hallucinate. So we, being the stupid stoners we are, ate one full pod, sat for about 15 minutes, and were not feeling anything. After consuming about 350 of these seeds, we thought we were Superman, neither of us tripping yet. We made our way to the park, and I started to feel strange. I had the worst cotton mouth. It felt like I had smoked a pound of weed. Then I looked down at my legs as I trotted down the pathway to the park. They looked and felt as if they were pendulums swinging back and forth. I finally got to the park, and my friend Steve was there. He had some weed, and I tried to smoke, but I couldn't. It tasted vile and disgusting. My face began to feel as if it was melting off my skull, and I started to trip. Bad. As I lay in dismay, my friends asked me if I was alright. I replied saying, "I don't know. Tell that man with the sword to stay away." I thought I was in the Revolutionary War in a trench. All of my friends were dressed in full combat gear. I decided to go home because the shit was starting to freak me out, but as soon as I started walking home, my legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, and soon enough, my arms felt this way also. I realized I was fucked up and would probably die if I didn't get to a hospital, so I continued to try and walk home until I finally got there. My parents weren't home, thank God, so I went right to bed and fell asleep for about 4 to 5 hours. When I awoke, I walked down the stairs and fell right off the staircase. Then I went to the bathroom and tried to piss, but couldn't. Then I felt something wet in my pants and thought it was just water, but I had pissed myself in reality. After I pissed my pants, I heard my parents pull up and the entire bathroom went white. I couldn't see a thing. I was banging around so much. After my parents opened the door, they found me on the floor passed out, completely red as my father described, red as a lobster. When I awoke, I was in a state of delirium. I didn't even recognize my own parents. I kept asking, "Who are you?" to my mother and calling my father a fat fuck. Then they tried to ask me what I was on. I tried to lie and say I was just smoking weed. They knew for goddamn sure I wasn't high on weed. I don't remember anything after that, but my dad told me what I did. He was hesitant at first because it had scared the living shit out of him. He had never seen anything like that in his life. He told me that when I got to the hospital, I tried to bite the doctors and beat them up. It required 4 doctors to strap me down. Still, my skin was a very red tone, and when I was strapped down, I tried so hard to get out, my neck muscles bulged at least 4 inches from my body, and then I passed out. I awoke the next morning to recognizing people again. At close range, my vision was so blurry, I couldn't even read. Datura is the worst drug in the world. Young and adventurous, willing to go the whole 9 yards at the drop of a pin, I caught a glimpse of something I wish I never saw. Standing proud in the garden of a complete stranger, a plant that was to change my mental state forever, the worst thing I've ever done. I waited until night to make my move, raping the beast of the flowers that made it so recognizable. Boiling them up in a little water, I made a potion that would make me anything but the person that was born from my mother's womb. Drinking the muddy-looking water was far from pleasant, and so were the effects. About 15 minutes rolled by, and I was sitting, scratching my head waiting, and bang! All of a sudden, I was locked in an extremely uncomfortable rushing sort of feeling. This lasted for roughly 5 minutes, and was followed by blurred vision. I could not read anything small. I was looking at my watch trying to read the time, but no matter how close or how far I held it from my face, it was all a blur. It wasn't long before I was totally removed from the real world and placed into a world of pleasure, fear, and discomfort. If there is a hell, I was on a day trip. Walking around the house in an attempt to find myself, I was switching between fun times and bad times. I walked into my bedroom, and as I passed my wall mirror, I saw a stranger in my room. Standing to the side of the mirror, I was thinking, who the fuck is that? It was about 5 minutes before I realized that it was my own reflection and stood there laughing at my own stupidity. Time seemed to just slip by, and before I knew it, the next day had arrived. Smoking imaginary cigarettes, walking outside completely naked, and talking to people who would disappear into thin air, I started wondering if this was going to end at all. It did end after time, but it was not nice. I was out of it for 2 days, and coming down from it was very scary. It was a very evil feeling. I felt like I had sold my soul to the devil. I can't really explain it, but it is not something that I can ever forget. If I could find a time machine, I would go back and undo the terrible mistake that I made when I collected evil from someone's garden. Just recently have I discovered that the hundreds of plants growing uncontrollably on my family's farm are Datura. For years, I've been overlooking the plant as if it were any other, until a horse of ours got sick from ingesting quite a few leaves. The vet came out to check on him and informed me that the plant, aka Jimsonweed, was poisonous if ingested by animals, but had a quite pleasant high if ingested or smoked by people. For a little over a year, I ignored this information, along with the plant, until riding home from school with a friend. Somehow, we began talking about the shortage of marijuana we've been having, and the Jimson weed growing around my house was brought up. Really enthusiastic, she told me a friend of hers ate a few of the same seeds and tripped over 12 hours. I almost laughed, but told her I would check it out, and sure enough, the seeds were identical to Datura stramonium. For nearly a week, I researched Datura and learned more than I thought possible about it. I thought it was a little much for what I am used to because I've never gotten stronger than marijuana or ecstasy, but decided it was an experience that I was ready for. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. At around 9:30 on a Thursday night, I chewed and swallowed a teaspoon of the very bitter, black mature seeds and washed them down with Gatorade. I chose Gatorade because of the intense dehydration I had read about. I had a sitter, we can call her Tori, which is needed while on this stuff. Around 10:45, my mouth became so dry it was sickening and impossible to talk. I began to talk what sounded perfectly normal in my head, but gibberish to my ears and to Tori. It would have been very frustrating if I needed to say something important, but since I didn't, Tori and I found it entertaining. I got the dilated pupils and the constant using the bathroom, but besides that, nothing too intense. About an hour later, Tori and I decided to crash, which was fine with me because my throat was so dry it was no fun talking. I'm not sure what time I woke up, but it must have been around 10 a.m. because Tori had to be at work by 12. I was tripping hard, but nothing seemed too unnormal to me. Random people watching me go to the bathroom, Tori disappearing in the middle of our conversations, and spending hours in front of the mirror talking to my new friend, my reflection, all seemed very normal. Every once in a while, I would snap back to myself and realize I was tripping, and kind of laugh or shake my head, only to find me doing it all over again a few minutes later. At one point, me and my sister, who knew nothing about me taking the seeds, were making my bed, and I kept telling Tori to get up so we could finish, but she'd just stare at me, even though I asked her more than once. My sister kept asking, "Who are you talking to?" And I would answer, "Tori," and point to the corner of my bed where she was lying down. A little shocked and kind of scared, my sister said, "Tori left 20 minutes ago." And not believing her, I frantically began throwing back my bed covers, expecting to find her and prove she was in my bed. I kept putting things down that disappeared constantly and walked around the house talking to every inanimate object that would talk back. None of this was too strange until I looked in my closet. Me and a couple people I'd never met before, obviously hallucinations, were going through my closet to pick out an outfit to wear to school, even though I wasn't going to school for a few more days. I got kind of lonely after they disappeared, but kept looking for an outfit anyways. Suddenly, I spotted a shirt of mine with a few little white bugs on it. I panicked and my mind raced. What if these bugs are on me? I mean, I wear these shirts. I instantly became paranoid. I looked on my arm and saw bugs digging underneath and crawling under my skin. I ran out of my room and found my mom, screaming to her about the bugs on my body. She said she saw nothing, but I figured she was just trying to comfort me. I clawed at the bugs, but they were too fast and strong. My mom's first reaction was that I was having a bad acid trip, but from the seriousness and paranoia in my voice, she started taking me seriously. She immediately called every doctor to see if any of them could take an emergency visit and drove me over to the first one available. FYI, because of this, I now have lost a great deal of respect for doctors. The doctor immediately looked at me and decided I was having an unexplained allergic reaction to who knows what. By now, I am red all over and bleeding in areas where I try to get these bugs. She figures the redness is my skin breaking out and not inflicted by my own self. I now have to apply this cream over my entire body and continue to take a million antibiotics for something I don't even have, and only I know I never really had. So whoever decides they want an unforgettable experience, please be careful. Being scared beyond belief is no fun, and let me add that nothing about the entire trip was the least bit fun or pleasant. It was weird and confusing, and 100% out of control. The pupil dilation left me totally letter-blind for a week. The dry mouth left my throat hurting for an entire week, and not to mention a mild depression about myself. If you are looking for a good high for the night, skip Datura.